that we are better than others and we should be leading the world and in charge of the world. And therefore, we should probably take over as much of it as possible. Added to that, that we are actually so much better than some who really don't deserve to live, we should actually get rid of those people, whether they be handicapped people or Jewish people and so forth. That whole attitude, which was behind that, how could you call it anything but arrogance? It's just pure arrogance. And if you stop and think about just about all wars of whatever source, wherever they have happened over the history of the world, you know, pretty much always behind it is that perspective that, you know, I'm better than you, I am superior to you, and I have a sense of entitlement in respect to you, and therefore, these wars start by and large from some kind of arrogance. Now, it's easy to kind of call people names from afar, but a little bit closer to home and closer to our time, perhaps, is how our European forebears maybe our ancestors in some cases dealt with the First Nations people. We just saw the video from Frontiers Ministry, and you know, in times past, over the centuries, there was it was mixed with good and good intentions. Very often, Europeans came to this world thinking they were better than the native persons, and that they were, their culture was higher and their language was better, and we needed to improve them and fix them because they're kind of a lower being. And this resulted in all kinds of horrible things. Till even recently, it was in the 20th century that the whole residential school debacle unfolded. And again, good intentions. And actually, there were some good things, lots of good things that happened for people in that. But at the same time, there was that kind of sense of superiority, which colored the whole thing. And many, many people got hurt. People were abused in these residential schools. People had the sense of identity torn away from them because they were taken from their own communities and their own culture and their own language. Arrogance, just arrogance. Maybe even a little bit closer, what about this current economic recession, which we are still struggling with, in case you hadn't heard, because it's on every day on the news. But, and I'm not an economist by any stretch of the imagination, but I do recall, I've watched some TV, and I remember the stories that were coming out maybe, like it's about 4 years ago now, that kind of seemed to be in and behind the whole start of this recession. And they were things like large corporations and large financial institutions that were doing things that were pretty shady. And they were leveraging, like I didn't really even get this, it didn't make any sense. They were leveraging debt, like enormously. So it made it look like there was a whole lot more money available than there really was. People were it was a kind of a secret behind the scenes thing going on. And basically some people, we ended up with people going to prison, we ended up with huge corporations falling apart, we ended up with many, many people losing their homes. And the repercussions of that, because the US is such a big economic juggernaut, kind of rippled throughout the whole world. But behind that, there were people who thought they were better than others. There was a greed thing involved, but it's really hard to kind of separate between greed and arrogance for me. They're kind of twins. Because if you're greedy, you obviously think that you are entitled to something that someone else has, and that you're more deserving of that, and you can just take that from them. So, they're pretty close to one another, the whole arrogance and twin thing. So I would have to say that underneath and behind the whole current economic recession was a whole lot of arrogance. And this makes me think of the world's two great economic systems, which color the way the world is. And most of us just know these two basic, the two basics, the left and the right, communism and capitalism. And of course, these two great systems and these two great theories, and I may have to deal with the repercussions of this afterwards, but both have some merit in theory. In theory. I know we've been taught to think communism bad, capitalism good, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. And if you stop and look at the whole communist theory or philosophy, it's quite appealing in the first instance. Kind of like, take from the rich and give to the poor. Sounds like Robin Hood. Or, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Sounds pretty kind of good. In fact, if you read the New Testament carefully, look at the book of Acts, sounds like the early church. You ever read the stories about the very beginnings of the church? It says in the early chapters of Acts, it says, no one thought that anything that they had was really their own. They sold their property and they sold their lands, and then they would give to as many as had need. Sounds kind of like from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Now, there's a big difference because they did it gladly, they did it voluntarily. Whereas in the communist system, it is imposed upon you from without. And here's where the problem started to come with the communist system. Because basically they took away everybody's right to own anything, the private property and the private ownership of things. And that began to crush people's spirit and their will to excel. Also, the power to make this all happen within a certain country, it kind of was conglomerated in the hands of a few people. And those few people, with that power in hand, kind of thought that they were better than others, and that they were in charge, and that they should be in charge, and that they should block the people in their land from hearing from anybody else who might be doing better than them. And so it just created a new tyranny. And what's behind it all? Arrogance. Arrogance. But now, we can't just let the capitalists off the hook. I know we're all hardcore capitalists, maybe not so much. we believe basically in the free market system, free enterprise, and in theory it's a great idea. I mean, there's a lot to be said for it. It seems to fit better with the human spirit, that you give people an opportunity to take what they have and invest or take a risk and make a business, make a go of it, and do well. And in so doing, as that kind of snowball effect happens, they will hire more people, they will create jobs, it will bring wealth to the land. All well and good. Except when people get really rich. And they start to feel they should run everything. And they start to think that they should stop others from having what they have. And they begin to have monopolies. I mean, there are various rules and laws to try to prevent this, but they don't always seem to work that well. And so people there begins to become a new class system where the rich kind of lord it over the poor, and there becomes a larger and larger discrepancy between rich and poor, which is what we're seeing today. Why? Why would they get that attitude? Arrogance. Arrogance. And all this is nothing new. We can go back to the dawn of time, and we can see it since the fall of the human race. We can see it unfold. Look at the Tower of Babel. Everybody kind of remembers the story of the Tower of Babel, about chapter 10 in Genesis. And the Tower of Babel is the story of the people of the world of the day who were all in one place. And they said, well, let's protect ourselves, and let's kind of gather our resources and make something of ourselves and proclaim ourselves to be great. And let's build a tower up to heaven. And there's a kind of a joke in the text. Because it says, God came down to look at their tower. Their tower that went up to heaven. God had to come down to take a look. Oh, well, what are those guys up to now? So he wasn't impressed because, of course, they were trying to be super independent, super, we got it all together. Why? Well, arrogance. And that was the first empire of which we hear about. And then as history unfolds, I know all of you are ancient history scholars and you know all that. Was that grade 10, I think? You'll remember grade 10. But the march of the empires, one after the other, that were great, mighty world empires, up to the time of Jesus' day, when the Romans had mastery, they felt they were entitled to it. They felt that they should be in charge of the world. In fact, there were all these in Jesus' particular time of ministry, his crucifixion, his resurrection. There was a guy named Tiberius Caesar was the emperor of the day, but before him was Caesar Augustus, Julius Caesar. After him was Caligula and Nero, all these Caesars. And somewhere in that mix, they began to decide that they also were gods. And that, that people should bow the knee to them. And they should call them Lord, as in Caesar is Lord. That's the back.